Knowing how to tell authentic is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Find it, match it, search it. Step 1. Find the style number on the tag. Step 2. Match the style number inside the jersey with the number on the tag. Step 3. Search it. A quick Google search of the style number will verify the jersey is authentic when the search results match the jersey being searched. Don't be fooled by counterfeit jerseys. Before you buy, remember to find it, match it, search it.
Fan Zone, 2 locations nationwide. Center City Mall, Chaguanas and Movietown, Port of Spain. Nationwide delivery available.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
WESN.
However, meaningful reform cannot take root where confidence in governance has been fundamentally eroded.
Good morning. This is Talking About here on WESN, the Content Capital Show. Michael Small with you. I know I'm a day late. This is technically not the start of the week. I apologize. It's my fault. No technical difficulties this time. No telecommunication issues this time. My fault. However, I have a lot to say today. Now, one of the things to look forward to next week, the debate with regards to our citizens in Syria continues. This network, I can't speak about the other media houses, but this network, we have brought up the issue time and time again. Now, with the widening of scope of the conflict in the region, I think it's a conversation worth having right now. But people are busy. I get that. That was Minister Vandana Mohit, Minister of the People there. A small clip of her presentation where she makes a good point. The question is, sometimes I wonder how careful politicians are with the points they make. Because she was speaking to the fact that, you know, if confidence is eroded, how could we move forward? How could we ensure that things are allowed to progress properly, that the right decisions are made, that we could have faith that everything is going to be fine from this point on, when confidence is potentially eroded? Now, she was speaking to governance. Ironically, what she was speaking about last Sunday was with regards to a state entity. You could apply it to government. You could also apply it not necessarily just to a state entity, but, well, I guess what has become, unfortunately, my favorite topic. Because how could you look to have faith with improving the crime situation when confidence is eroded? in the criminal justice system? And at what point are we going to acknowledge the fact that the politicians run the risk of confidence being eroded in them, not just the previous administration? Because, well, first of all, the whole radar situation, I think, at the end of the day was much to do about nothing. But it's not just that the opposition made it a big deal. I think, to be fair to the opposition, they made it a big deal in part because it technically was a big deal, and the government fed into the fact, at least a little bit, that it was a big deal. Because in the middle of a U.S. military endeavor, we get a military radar set up on our soil with no explanation. And we don't necessarily, we're not entitled to an explanation. You don't have to give us an explanation. But when you don't have a good enough explanation, well, people are going to ask questions. And going back to the Minister of Defense, it's your job to be able to answer the questions. Now, to be fair, he had what I think is the best answer with regards to the radar, and that is to monitor potential air traffic with regards to drug smuggling. Because ultimately, such a radar at its maximum range is really an air search radar. Tracking surface targets at its maximum range is a little bit trickier because radars are machines that require line of sight. And what makes it unfortunate is the Americans came, they did what they wanted to do, and now they're gone. And as much as the Prime Minister tried to frame it that they supported the reduction in murder rate, the murder rate was reduced before that. We didn't need them for that. There are even some who would say, to what extent was the drugs and the drug supply cut off, shut off, reduced? Because on one hand, there's speculation that, well, they just dipped into their reserves, right? We didn't get everything. Based on the narratives of previous administrations and the intelligence and the speculation and the estimates, what we intercept is a drop in the bucket. But also they have some who believe, and these are not PNM supporters, by the way, that they didn't even necessarily stop all the drugs from coming from the mainland to here. And if it was such a priority, and we're still asking the Americans for help, they're just going to pack up and go? Well, on some level, it's potentially because, first of all, I think no one is going to say that 100% of the reason why the Americans were here was to stop transnational drug smuggling. That's more or less clear. Because dare I say, this is the difficult question now, and I'm not sure if our government is looking to ask this because they're trying to keep a peaceful relationship with the Venezuelan government, but at times seemingly is unable to do so. Now that they have removed Maduro and his wife and the government's leadership is replaced by the very combative vice president, at least towards us, to what extent has the drug smuggling seen any long-term adjustment? To what extent has the extreme emergency powers that interdicted the drug smuggling led to long-term improvement? And dare I say the answer to that is nothing. And the thing is, with the radar being packed up, they say it's $3 million a day to operate. I'm not entirely sure if that's the truth. Accounting-wise, it might be $3 million. I don't think they actually have to spend $3 million, or a day or a month or whatever. But the reality is, they had another agenda. Transnational crime is just one aspect of it, at best. Some people don't trust Donald Trump, but I'll say this, he's relatively straightforward. But there were other things on the agenda, like taking Maduro out. So the actual utility of the radar, I find questionable, because I have never really heard of significant drug smuggling being done via the air. Now, maybe the Americans thought they were trying to just head things off at the pass, nip something in the bud, maybe a potential adjustment the smugglers might make. If you take them out at sea, they might try to go in the air. But to me, I don't know to what extent that was really a thing. So perhaps there was another reason for the radar that we just don't know. At the end of the day, it leaves somewhat of a bitter taste in some people's mouths, because there's an inconvenient aspect of being the prime minister. And I will continue to say this. I have no problem saying this now. If anybody insults the prime minister, that is an affront to the entire nation, because she is our prime minister. Regardless of what happens, you cannot disregard nor disrespect, nor allow someone to disregard or disrespect our prime minister. The office, at the very least, demands a certain level of respect, and she technically won the office. If you don't necessarily like her behavior and her language, that does not necessarily mean all of a sudden you could disrespect. But that comes with a flip side. That comes with a caveat. Because to be our prime minister, that means you have to be, as simple and redundant as it seems, our prime minister for all. And being unable to sympathize and potentially try to at least meet halfway the fears or concerns of some of the citizens of this country, and to look past the politics and to look past your political opponents, it unfortunately leaves us stuck in a place where we can't necessarily move forward. And as the challenges get tougher, it would be easier if we could move forward together, but it seems as though that's just not in the cards in politics in 2026, not just here, all around the world. But notice what I said about the whole US military intervention. They came, they saw, they blew up drug boats, they left, and all of the transnational criminal organizations, drug cartel lords, drug lords, etc., they don't really care about the boats that they lost or the individuals that were killed. The spice must flow. In the Middle East, the spice is oil. In the Caribbean, Latin American region, the spice is drugs. And they will make it flow. They will make sure it flows. So we haven't necessarily been able to see any long-term improvements with some special emergency powers. Now, maybe the coalition will help. Mexico and Ecuador has potentially seen more long-term change. But perhaps the whole narrative of Maduro being the leader of a cartel. And even if you take out the leader, do you really stop the cartel or the gang? And all of these things, to me, are potential lessons for our own situation. Because we've just seen the biggest military in the world expend a lot of ammunition and go to great expense, but not necessarily solve or even improve the actual situation that we and our government publicly wanted them to help with. And is that not conceptually the same thing as the state of emergency? All of these emergency measures, but what's being done for the long term? Now, at least with the Americans, they could say, well, we've gone into a new phase, we're putting together a coalition. But one could argue that the gap between the extreme military action and anything that you do moving forward is kind of a lost opportunity. And it's the same thing with the state emergencies. By not actually having anything to take advantage of the opportunities generated, what are you accomplishing? Of course, it would help if the TTPS would not seem as though something that has the confidence in the institution completely eroded. And we've reached a point where I think a lot of people will acknowledge the fact that the criminal justice system needs some sort of, facelift, reform, new coat of paint, adjustments, improvements. But the people in charge are the same people in charge, and the results are the same results. Of course, the politicians at the top, we've swapped them out. But ironically, what improvement have we really seen? And in fact, something occurred that really makes me wonder if they really have their eye on the ball or if they drop the ball. The Minister of Defense had a very interesting claim to make, and he made it in Parliament. And I do find it interesting. I don't necessarily know if anybody, to what extent other people reacted to this in the privacy of their own homes, watching it on their mobile devices or on TV or reading it in the newspapers, because technically it was in the newspapers. I have that clip there for you from the Minister of Defense. Let's play that clip right now.
And the thing is, Dana Sitahal also knew she was going to get killed. She knew. Yes, she did. She chose not to have security around her. And she went on. And there was, well, if you are in the case, you would hear about the intercepts. There are intercepts. So the police is there listening, knowing that a high-profile prosecutor is going to be killed. And instead of doing what we did, you know what they did? They listen, and they listen, and they listen. And now she's not here. That's what they do. You know what they do? Nothing. What they do and nothing is the same thing. That's the PNM fail. So they cannot come here, and he didn't try. You cannot come here and tell us what to do, what new crime plan. And yes, the thing is, an SOE is not a crime plan, and we never said it was. But if it is necessary to preserve life, we'll do it again and again and again.
If it is necessary to preserve life, I don't have a problem with that. My problem is the again and again and again and again. Emergency powers are not meant to be done again and again and again and again. They're meant to give you an opportunity to arrest the situation, suspend the situation, prevent the situation, solve it while it's being suppressed so that you can move on with normal everyday life. The minister has just acknowledged the fact that an SOE is not a crime plan. I asked something earlier on, or made a statement. Politicians need to be careful what they say. I wonder if Minister Wayne Sturge, Minister of Defense, criminal defense attorney, I don't know if he'll continue that career path after his time in government, however long that may be. Did he consider when he made that statement the fact that the Prime Minister in front of CARICOM claimed that crime was reduced by two things, UNC policy or government policy and American intervention? Now the timing, technically, the timing does not track with her statements, first of all, because the mail rate started going down at the beginning of the year before the election. And definitely the American intervention was not the key point of the murder reduction. But let's go with policy. Let's just assume that the Prime Minister is 100% correct. She's technically not in terms of chronological facts. Let's just, for the sake of arguments, go with that. What did she say? Government policy. What was the government policy? The only crime-fighting government policy of any practical note, because the stand your ground legislation, to what extent has that actually come into play to do anything? We haven't seen the corroborating FUL adjustments or improvements, the process to give out firearm user licenses. We haven't seen that. Let's not forget, the government itself, the UNC as a party, part of the package that they were selling the people was having firearms to defend yourself, not trying to defend yourself from 8 men who they themselves have firearms and you have a broomstick. I'm pretty sure that's not the intention. Because if that's what you're trying to sell me right now, good luck with that. Yes, I know people say you don't necessarily need a firearm to stand your ground. But when it's 5 to 8 against 1 and they have firearms, forgive me, I'm not looking to use a stick. So the Prime Minister said government policy. All we've seen are state of emergencies. We haven't even really seen anything substantial in terms of our crime plan from the Commissioner of Police, from the Minister of Homeland Security, and technically it's not his job, but from the Minister of Defense himself. And the ZOSO legislation is the zones of special states of emergencies. It's just state of emergency in another form. So the minister himself admitted that a state of emergency is not a crime plan. Let's not forget, he came to Parliament to say zones of special operations will solve crime in a matter of 5 years or less. Because he thinks you just deal with the head, you arrest the gang leader, and to some extent he alluded to that in his presentation where he said you cut off access, the communication, etc., from the leaders with the PDOs, blah, 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 blah. I mean, this is going to be somewhat insulting, but it's amateur hour here with the concepts on how to stop crime. Really, kindergarten by the numbers. Oh, well, we just deal with the gang leader and what, the gang will just dissolve? Gang leaders have been murdered in this country. That didn't stop their gang. That didn't stop the gang members. That didn't stop the crime. That didn't pacify the areas that they ran. If we want to believe everything the Americans sold us, they got the head of the cartel de la Soles or whatever, cartel of the sun. And now the Colombian marijuana is back on the market. He tried to sell us that the not a crime plan, the lesser version of the not a crime plan, that's what the zones are. They are in some certain ways technically, because you could have a curfew with a state of emergency. They just choose not to do it. You don't need zones of special operations for that. So the lesser version of a state of emergency, the lesser version of not a crime plan was, according to the same minister, their plan to solve crime in less than 5 years. 5 years for the most. Because they will just arrest the gang leaders. Oh wait, by the way, we're conveniently forgetting that some gang leaders were already in prison. So of course now you need emergency powers to keep them in the army barracks. Because accountability of the prison service, apparently, that's not a thing. It's unreasonable for us to expect that an arm of the law enforcement agency of the state could actually competently do its job. And dare I ask, how long is it going to take before the regiment is similarly compromised or as compromised as the prison service? Because there's no secret source that separates the defense force from the prison service or the TTPS. They are not somehow insulated by a magical veil. They come from, like the prison officers, our societies. They have family and they have stakes in our society. They live amongst members of our society. They don't magically just stay sequestered for the rest of their life. They have no contacts, no dependents, no nothing. But then, of course, there was the big thing that he said to justify, we need to protect life. We need to protect and prevent. And look at what they did. They did not prevent Dana Sita Hal's murder. And at that moment, obviously the Minister of Defense didn't realize how badly he messed up. My question is, does the members of the government bench, sans the two members of the TPP from Tobago who were sitting behind him, I don't expect them to necessarily have all of these things at the ready. I myself looked it up to be sure. I didn't just take the opposition MP Stuart Young's at his word, but the partnership, the People's Partnership, was in power until December 2015. Sorry, not December, September. Dana Sita Hal was murdered in 2014. On September 7, 2015, the coalition was defeated in the 2015 general elections. Right. Dana Sita Hal was assassinated on May the 4th, 2014. Now, I don't know about you, but I find it beyond ridiculous that the Minister of Defense is going to blame the PNM for failure, according to him, of the national security apparatus that occurred during the People's Partnership administration. At what point now am I allowed, and people are not going to look at me funny when I bring this up, am I allowed to ask the question, to what extent do these politicians really know what they're doing? Because my boy pulled something out of his hat. He thought he had, look, I'm going to hit them with this one and they're going to feel it. Except what he didn't realize is he made a great case. He made a great case at the ineptitude and the lack of action with regards to a major national security incident, the assassination of a state prosecutor. He made a great case on the poor performance of the Kamala Prasad-Bissessar-led People's Partnership government. Ain't that something? To thunderous applause by a UNC bench, he made that case in full view of the public. It is now, as far as I'm aware, on the Hansard, a part of parliamentary record. He said that with a straight face. Maybe I'm misunderstanding how these things go. But when you are in opposition in 2014, and you've been in opposition for about 4 to 5 years, for 4 years, I'm pretty sure you can't have direct responsibility of a matter. You want to say that the PNM messed up the criminal justice system? That's fine, but that's not the argument that the Minister of Defense made. He said that the PNM didn't do anything with the intercepts on the threats against Dana Sita Hal's life, except they couldn't because they were in opposition. I think that's fairly obvious, right? Killed in 2014, and then the PNM won the election in 2015. 10 years. Yeah, well, 10 years from 2025 to 2015. At what point now, and I'm going to get into this after the break further, are we not going to acknowledge the fact that the government does not have a crime plan? Look at what a lot of people say about Donald Trump. Is there a plan with regards to Venezuela? Is there a plan with regards to Iran? I don't know. Now, on one hand, the military action to get Nicolas Maduro was very well executed. Perhaps people think, oh, look, it's so easy. And they go into Iran, and all of a sudden, circumstances change. It's not so easy. Now, I'm not necessarily going to put stock in comparing it to Vietnam or Afghanistan under the Americans in the 2000s, or Afghanistan in the 80s, where the Soviets also failed, and it's called their Vietnam. all of these different incidents have their own particular circumstances and challenges. But given the fact that we don't know, we are left to speculate. If critics of the American president want to question if he has a plan or not, I can't fault them for that. But on the same vein, why can't that logic apply here? Because their plan is a state of emergency, except Minister Sturge just admitted that a state of emergency is not a crime plan. Yes, as far as I'm aware, the Minister of Homeland Security said something in effect of more resources. Whoop-de-doo. We don't have resources for body cameras. Where again? All of a sudden again, resources? But let me not go into there just yet. The fact of the matter is, the Minister of Defense, apparently a well-respected, successful defense attorney, highly educated, who goes to high-level meetings, not the Minister of Homeland Security, who seemingly is read into high-level sessions, right? As far as I'm aware, he spoke to the Americans with regards to the Trinidad and Tobago. He went with the Prime Minister with regards to the Shield of the Americas Summit. They were even asking about the refinery, which is technically not under his purview, but how could you come to Parliament and say that, not even do your own research yourself? Now, ironically, Gary Griffith has to defend the partnership's position. Because again, Gary Griffith was not a Minister of National Security under a PNM government, but he was there. What I can confirm is that no time during my tenure as Minister of National Security were any reports given to us about Dana Sital being a target. Here's the problem. Who do you believe? Because we have a situation now where the Minister of Defense is saying something, a former Minister of National Security is saying something that is conflicting. Both of them were led by the same person. Both of them, technically speaking, reported or are reporting to or is reporting to the same person. So one of them is wrong, and ironically, that will reflect poorly on their leader, but they both have the same leader. What am I supposed to do with this information? I understand the PNM at times have looked very dysfunctional, and I'll be the first one to be on the side of the discussion that yes, Dr. Keith Rowley did not do Patrick Manning any favors. And by saying not do Mr. Manning any favors, undermine him. And by saying undermine him, potentially directly contributed to that snap election. Let me put it that way. Let me put it that way. So I'm not saying that the other side is some mythical land of utopia. But right now, all too often, and to some extent, and I said this about the government, the PNM government, but it was maybe because of how it was framed, you might not necessarily directly link it. When they wanted to keep blaming the UNC opposition, that was opposition like 8 years ago, and they're still pulling things out of their hat. And I want to use a different three-letter word that begins with A, but we ain't gonna go there because it's a live TV. I didn't appreciate it then. Like at some point, that's just an excuse. But in the current government's case now, I don't have an issue you bringing up. Well, look at the state of the economy that they left us in. Well, look at the state of the criminal justice system that they left us in. Except they seem to be more than happy to continue with the criminal justice system as it has always been. They're not looking to make any improvements there. They don't even want to solve the body camera issue. But more importantly, look at the crime situation. From what I have seen, and I didn't see all of it, to be fair. I did not see all of it. I mainly saw the Minister of Defense and some of his contributions and some of the Prime Minister's contributions. It is basically a blame the PNM, blame the PNM, blame the PNM. The problem is, I have no problem blaming PNM for what was and how that contributes to what is. But I can't blame the PNM right now for what will be, because they're not in power right now. But it's easy when you don't have a crime plan. We're going to instruct the public with blame them. Blame those guys. It's their fault. It's their fault. Well, what's your solution to get us out of it? Because the Minister of Defense said it's not an anti-crime plan to use a state of emergency. That is, for those who might not realize, an admission that a state of emergency isn't going to solve crime. It's merely a band-aid. Oh, wait, government tried to say it's not a band-aid. Which one is it? Going back again, government needs to be careful what they say. You can't say a state of emergency is not a band-aid, and then have a minister come in Parliament and say, well, we understand a state of emergency is not a crime plan. Which one is it? So, let's end this segment where I started. Can we get that clip of the Minister of the People, Vandana Mohit, that we started the show with, the short clip? Let's run that again.
However, meaningful reform cannot take root where confidence in governance has been fundamentally eroded.
Hi, I am Emiliana Beechan and I am a mental health and conflict resolution consultant. Welcome to Mind Matters, the show where we explore the intricate world of mental health and the art of conflict resolution. Join us as we hear from mental health professionals, conflict resolution experts, and everyday people who have transformed their lives through understanding and communication. Mind Matters, WESN, Content Capital.
Yeah, cue this Minister of the People. I wonder if I should change the order, boy.
Knowing how to tell authentic is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Find it, match it, search it. Step 1. Find the style number on the tag. Step 2. Match the style number inside the jersey with the number on the tag. Step 3. Search it. A quick Google search of the style number will verify the jersey is authentic when the search results match the jersey being searched. Don't be fooled by counterfeit jerseys. Before you buy, remember to find it, match it, search it.
Fan Zone, 2 locations nationwide. Center City Mall, Chaguanas and Movietown, Port of Spain. Nationwide delivery available.
I'm back here and talk about the WSND Content Capital Show. Michael Small with you once again. Spent a long time talking about national security. We'll get to one of the Prime Minister's contributing remarks soon on that same debate that Minister Sturge was speaking about. But I just want to know if the Minister of Defense can't even get his dates right. Why am I supposed to have confidence in what he says? He's literally blaming the wrong party for something that happened under the watch of his party. He wasn't there, but this is, in my mind, on the level, actually no, this isn't quite as bad, in a way. When Reginald Amor, senior counsel, couldn't remember if he was senior counsel or junior counsel on a matter. I was like, yeah, right. That's real convenient. Oh, wait, perjury. From an international court, by the way. You're doing this in an international court. Now, most of us will assume I say assume because, you know, I don't know what was in his brain. I don't have material evidence to state that this is a statement of fact. We will assume that was intentional. What Minister Stage did in our parliament might not have necessarily been intentional, but in a way, does that make it better or worse? That, you know, Scotty didn't know. Scotty didn't know what he didn't know. Don't tell Scotty. Don't tell Stage. Stage didn't know. Now, one of the things that I am concerned with, and I've said this before, is members of parliament, both opposition and government majority, seemingly, as time goes on, the newer generations are less and less skilled, proficient in their job, have less understanding of their job, are not as good practicing their job, and that is to say the job of being a parliamentarian and governing the country. And that requires a fair bit. When you think about it, you need to understand a lot of different technical matters, because that's what the ministries do. They oversee various fields that the government provides services for society, and a lot of these fields are either highly technical or very complicated, whether it's social programs, agriculture, trade and industry, of course, national security, ministries, you know, etc., etc. There's a lot of technical aspects that you need to understand to implement policy. But then you also need to understand certain things like public communication, leadership, and the like. And at times, I feel that in a lot of aspects, these things are lacking from our politicians. Now, some of it is even from the experienced politicians. The former Minister of Finance didn't necessarily know certain digital concepts, and he's making presentations on digital technology. Didn't know how to pronounce the word buko, and he's talking about Tobago. I mean, that's just, I don't understand. Someone of his age never heard of buko, never goes to Tobago. I don't get it. And of course, most infamously, was seemingly ignorant with regards to the process of an audit and how that's supposed to be done properly. Now, to be fair, the current Minister of Finance doesn't understand the word diversification. Like, he literally showed us before the election that he didn't understand the word diversification. But, I mean, bachelors of economics, see how far that gets you. But they're not the only ones. One young, the latter, one old, the former. Dare I say, I see this too often across the board spectrum. And I gave you a PNM example and a UNC example. And I'll go further. But there was one issue that I wanted to highlight to start off with that then goes into potentially an example of what I'm talking about now. It's time to cue this.
These matters point to a pattern of governance failure that cannot be dismissed as isolated incidents. Further, the recent actions taken against the former Chief Executive Officer, CEO, including disciplinary proceedings, suspension, and the ultimate termination of his services, raise serious questions about timing and intent. These measures were only undertaken after the ministry initiated the intervention of its internal auditing unit to examine the authority's financial affairs. One cannot escape the troubling perception that these actions were reactive rather than responsible and designed to create the impression of corrective leadership, when in fact the board had presided over the very conditions that necessitated intervention. Equally concerning is that upon the installation of the new government, when prudence and good governance would have dictated that the board make way in the interest of institutional stability and public confidence, the members chose instead to retain office nearly a year thereafter. This decision has only served to prolong uncertainty and further undermine the authority's ability to function effectively. I want to share with the nation today and the media that the Ministry of the People's Social Development and Family Services remains firmly committed to strengthening the Children's Authority of Trinidad and Tobago so that it can fulfill its statutory mandate with integrity and effectiveness. However, meaningful reform cannot take root where confidence in governance has been fundamentally eroded. Therefore, in the interest of restoring stability, rebuilding public trust, and allowing the authority to move forward under leadership capable of meeting the demands of its critical mandate, I call upon the present board again of the Children's Authority of Trinidad and Tobago to tender their resignations with immediate effect.
So, based on what I have seen from the minister, what she's doing is she's showing us things that we have not enough context for, implying that it's bad. Like saying they bought an ice maker that cost $343,000. I could see where that was potentially not a wise decision. I just don't know what the reason was that they are going to say there was a reason for doing so. Now, the board did respond, and I'm just double checking to make sure that they did not mention the ice maker. But the board, one of the board's claims is that they wanted to meet with the minister. There were no meetings to discuss the situation. There were no meetings where the minister asked for explanations. Because while you would assume, oh, well, you know, of course they're going to lie and they're going to be evasive, you still have to go through the motions. If you're going to assume that the board is going to be crooked and corrupt, then you're going to assume that what they did was crooked and corrupt, and then you're going to potentially fall into the trap of not actually finding a smoking gun, but rather displaying your own biases. Because this I've seen happen too often from politicians. We want to, what's the word there? We want to not just infer. I don't want to say infer, because infer actually leads to looking at having evidence to make an inference. And they might have evidence or they might not, but they don't share the evidence with us. So they basically throw out conjecture. That's what, here's an example, Minister Hines did. Minister Hines threw out inferred crimes or illegality. Because he did have evidence in a sense. Millions of rounds of ammunition being bought by licensed legal arm dealers. Millions of rounds. What do they need so much ammunition for? Blah, 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 blah. Never explaining why that amount of ammunition being imported into the country was a bad thing. Never explaining how the imported ammunition could lead to dangerous situations. Never explaining to what extent did these licensed arms dealers break the law, break standard procedure, break reasonable judgment. No context at all. He just merely gives us a big number and say, look at this big number. It's big. Isn't that bad that it's big? Oh my gosh, look how big it is. That is so bad. Not actually making a point as to what went wrong beyond the number big, how bad is big. It is not too dissimilar to the arrest of then Commissioner Earl Airwood Christopher, a commissioner who, as commissioner, I disliked her in the role as commissioner, but I am, again, not about to be like, yes, good for her. No. She was arrested. They couldn't even figure out what to charge her with. They couldn't tell us what law she allegedly broke on. So if they couldn't tell us what law she broke, is it surprising that the DPP kept telling them, wheel and come again, because that's not good enough? Because they said, well, she authorized sniper rifles for the SSA. That's cute. It implies that a law is broken because you're presenting it in a way that suggests it's illegal, but you can't actually point to us and say, where is it illegal? She can authorize firearms, including restricted firearms, but on top of that, by law, sniper rifles are not restricted. Was there a law that says the SSA cannot have these firearms? Where was that? Now, when you kind of read between the lines, it seems as though Minister Hines and that arrest of, well, Minister Hines' statement potentially, not necessarily paved the way, but it started the ball rolling on what eventually led to the Brent Thomas affair and the arrest of the commissioner. Now, to what extent were those last two items unethical and illegal? That is yet to be determined. I don't even know if the former commissioner is pursuing the matter any further. I believe she is, but we haven't heard anything since. The whole court system moves so slow. You know, by the time anything happens, it might be 10 years later. And the actual ability to deal with the problem, to impart consequences on those involved, will be long gone. And we don't care. Now, this current situation, the minister is basically saying, oh, look, all of these things are so bad. They owe this money number big. Number big. They bought an ice maker. It cost big number. We don't know if they needed the ice maker to supply all their facilities with ice for whatever reason. We don't know. Was it for the comfort of the children? I don't know. One would ask the question, why buy an ice maker in the first place? If you have facilities for children, don't they just have freezers connected to fridges? If they need kitchen services or kitchen space, I don't know. But we're not going into all of those details to explain to us why number big is bad. Now, that in and of itself, because, okay, you know what? Maybe she's just not giving us enough details, right? With regards to Minister Hines, it was a bit more clear-cut that he was kind of, you know, being smart with stupidness. But maybe not for the minister, except now, as a minister, when you are trying to communicate effectively, one of the things that you need to do is you need to understand the concepts that you are utilizing in order to take shortcuts for people to understand your position, right? So case in point, when the current Minister of Finance, before he was Minister of Finance on the campaign trail, is putting forward the economic plans, which really wasn't much, by the way, of the UNC to say, this is what we intend to do, please vote for us because this is how we're going to make things better. One of the things he spoke about was diversification. And the first item in his list of things to improve diversification was literally to improve circumstances for pre-existing industries, which is literally counter to the entire concept of diversification if you're going to put focus on pre-existing industries, and not pre-existing industries in a new way, pre-existing industries to enhance their scope and to potentially try and find new products and new markets and etc. No, just to make the pre-existing situation better for them. That is literally not diversification. But my boy goes out there to the public, says his due. No one else, I believe, picks up on it. Maybe people are being generous. I'm not so generous, because I've seen this from the PNM. So forgive me for being an equal opportunity critic. So now the current minister of the people comes in and she basically says, first of all, I understand on a practical level this is a real thing. Or the holdovers from the previous administration make things harder. I get that. But technically that's an assumption, right? You assume that they are pure political appointees that are there only to carry out the PNM agenda. Without evidence of that, I'm not necessarily comfortable assuming that. Now, the minister said, well, they irresponsibly held on to their positions. Well, unfortunately, if there is nothing to prevent them from doing this, then isn't it technically within their right to do so? And you're complaining about what they didn't do voluntarily because that would merely be your preference? Because every election, there's the whole rigmarole about how, you know, you're firing their people to replace them with your people, right? Are we going to make it that? Now, granted, even Karen said you want to some extent, have your own people in order to execute your agenda. If that's the case, it's a failure of the system. It's not a failure of the individuals. If there is nothing that requires of them to resign. But then the best part was when she said, in the interest of stability. Because it makes me wonder, and I guess I'm not that smart of a guy. The minister is technically younger than me, but she's probably more qualified than I am. She's probably more learned than I am. She probably has much greater academic credentials and thus has gone through a much greater academic process and been tested to a higher degree than I have. But even I know that stability is not brought about, is not reinforced, is not supported by change. Stability, conceptually, is a continuation of what is. Politically, in governance, change is anti-stability. That's one of the lamentations of a change in government. It causes agendas to change. And when you change the people out from the public service each time, this is the argument against changing the people out of the public service each time there's a change in government. Because that leads to a lack of continuity. A lack of continuity, that is what instability is. Not a PNM appointee, assuming they were appointed by the PNM, remaining in place. Remaining in place is actually what promotes stability. Because the agenda is not going to take a 180-degree left turn all of a sudden. Now, again, Karen has brought it up herself. I have no issue with this conceptually in the sense of when you have a new government, consideration has to be made in changing certain key positions in the public service in order to ensure that the government's plans are properly implemented. That is technically not what stability means. Stability means you're going to continue with the previous administration's agenda. That's stability. Change always comes with the risk of instability because you're putting in new people. They may or may not have experience doing this job. They may or may not have to make drastic changes in order to execute your new agenda. Those drastic changes may or may not be implemented easily, even if everyone is acting in good faith. There are growing pains to any situation. You make a ship, it has to go on a shakedown cruise. We got the cargo, the new cargo ferry. They didn't automatically put it into service. Stability would have been to keep the previous boat. Changes, new boat, it's an area of instability. We have to do shakedown cruises to make sure everything is kosher. Oh, wait, look at that, it got a hole. So what I'm left to believe is the Minister of the People literally doesn't understand what it means when she invokes the concept of stability in governance during changes of leadership. Which then tells me she basically was looking for a generic positive word, like a buzzword, that she could throw into her speech to tell the people because she herself doesn't potentially know what she's doing with regards to this specific thing. And then by not meeting with the Insurance Authority, to what degree can I take with any level of seriousness her opinion on the board of the Insurance Authority without meeting the board? Because what she has said is not clear-cut a smoking gun. So this is where it's an issue for the rest of us, the wider society, both non-UNC supporters and UNC supporters. To what extent is this literally just politicking to get the board to be replaced. I don't know. Now, here's the thing, huh? There's a part of me that's like, stop. But the Police Service Commission is going to remain? Or, yeah, I'm sorry, that's right. Because they are ensuring that your Commissioner of Police, who is starting to look worse and worse as the day goes on, is not held to account for any of his lackings. So we don't need to replace them. Is this politicking to replace a board because the board is not going to play ball? I have to ask the question, because if you don't even understand what stability means in this sort of situation, now granted, the board might be corrupt, the board might not be corrupt. I don't know based on what the minister said, because what the minister said was not detailed enough. And I'm fed up of having politicians imply illegality. If they did anything wrong, charge them. Expose it to the public. Why do you have to ask them to resign? That and all was the first red flag to me. They did something wrong. Why should I ask them to resign, though? Like, and at the very least, all right, if they did something wrong and you have no way to address the system, then the problem is not the board. If they did something wrong and you have no way to remove them legitimately, the problem is not the board. The problem is the system itself that needs to be fixed. But you're not trying to fix the system, you just want to swap out the board. So I'm not really seeing long-term solutions to this, whether they did something wrong or if they're innocent. I'm just seeing a lot of politicking. We have a remoney line. Before we move on, caller, we'll take the call. Caller, good morning, you're on here.
Sean, morning.
Morning.
What just on the TV?
Yeah.
No, I think it's time for these people and them to stop canvassing like if done with of elections and start to run the country. Stop trying to one up one another. Because we need a serious roadmap going forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to ask you one stupid question. We see the Prime Minister and she convoy going here and there, and we didn't see nobody going Caracas. Because I want to know who going and when they're going to resume this drug and gas deal.
Mm-hmm.
Because as far as I see it right now, America cut the world in half. So all who west of Greenwich Meridian, including us, we on this side here, NATO and the Middle East, China and Russia, they're on their side. And I say so because, all right, North Korea has a planned economy, so too does China, so too does Russia. Yet Donald Trump had the commission to tell them it's time for regime change.
Russia,
I don't think he had that option.
Russia, I don't think is technically a planned economy anymore. There might be a hybrid, but they are very much more capitalist.
They're all socialists.
Well,
they all left. They all on the left.
Oligarchs are not
Cuba on
products.
the left, Venezuela on the left.
Oligarchs
So
are not products of socialism, though.
Oligarchs are not products of socialism.
No, they are essentially.
That we say.
They are essentially the consequence of implementing capitalism with corruption from the start.
The oligarchs, to me, are the results of corruption in the plan system. Just like what we have in Trinidad and Tobago here. The parasitic oligarchy, as Pandey would call them. Because they are the ones with the money. They are the ones with the money. And everybody else ain't handle. So, same name, the same class of people or not different system. But my point here is this.
Yes.
Because America realized Guyana had the gas, Guyana had the oil, sorry. Trinidad has the infrastructure. Venezuela also has the oil and the gas. So I find it's time the three of us, which is Trinidad, Guyana, and Venezuela, form a triangle here. We would pay them for the gas that we drill, put it through the trains in Atlantic LNG, and sell it. Guyana have 900,000 barrels of oil per day, or a refinery could do about 250,000 barrels a day. we get that and get it going here. Because with the price of oil going up, we had to import gas, we had to import diesel. So we will be paying a higher price for the imports, even though we're getting a little more revenue. It might work out worse off in the end. Because when I watch this program and I listen to San Fernando, Diego Martin, Nova, we have better ideas on how to run Trinidad and Tobago than how these clowns and the movie we have there. Because when I watch that Sturge, the only thing I seen is that his belly is going down. It's going down to his knees. And he really needs some kind of push to come in the parliament and talk that kind of nonsense, and nobody really paying him and all them, he pick up on it. We pick up on it out here.
No, Stuart Young did.
Because Mr. Tal was murdered during UNC's time in office. And he still want to blame the PNM. So that's to tell you where his intelligence lies. We'd rather discuss that because we're on positive things. Now, with regard to this minister here, talking about $77 million. So the Ministry of Education, when MTS, the when TNTech, nobody called for nobody in the Ministry of Education.
$500 million.
To resign. The ASJA board just lose a case with a little girl who got 0 for cheating in the exam. And they wanted to give her 0 in all her exams. And the court say no. Nobody called for them to resign. And the thing about it, government is not giving the ministries and them the right allocation that they require. If you check it out, none of these state organizations are fully funded to be where they're supposed to be. And then they'll come to slap that in the face because why? She too wants regime change inside of there to put in her people. But when her people go in and they ain't getting the right amount of money, the same thing going to happen.
Basically.
So them just spinning top in mud. I go listen off, have a good day.
Yeah, thank you, caller. That's basically what I said. Like, I'm not sure if she said how much the Children's Authority, their allocation is. And then now, you have to say how much they're allocated. And depending on where the discrepancy is between how much they're allocated and why they're still owing so much money. Because then you have to spell out not just how much money they owe, but what are they spending the allocation on besides a $300,000 ice maker, which again, I don't know what the explanation for that is. Maybe somebody just had a brain fart, I get it. But that does not explain the $77 million or whatever that she brought up. Big number, big. Look how bad, big number. Right. As you pointed out, the situation with MTS and the Ministry of Education owing MTS, who then owes subcontractors, that's gotten out of hand. EFCL was MTS's predecessor. And the EFCL situation happened, as far as I'm aware, and I could be wrong, not only throughout the PNM administration, but even to some extent started on the partnership as well. The Ministry of Education's budget, their expenditure, seemingly far exceeds the budget allocation for it. And this is something that none of the government ministers in 2 to 3 administrations is seemingly willing to come and explain to us exactly what's going on there. And the Ministry of Education's budgetary situation eclipses the Children's Authority. You're correct on that, as far as we're aware, based on the numbers that they have given us. But let's go on. We have let me just double check which one. We have another video together. I want to switch gears again. The Prime Minister had some pointed statements to make. Now, let me just, case in point, the caller is actually a very good example. And I don't blame the caller for this. Caller's not a parliamentarian. Caller's not a politician. Caller's just a citizen. If he wants to put some sarcasm in, that's his, prerogative. But the statement on Minister Stage's belly size, technically it's not useful, right? It's not useful. So to throw something disparaging there doesn't really have any value in the debate at hand. Now, to throw remarks that criticizes his statements, and maybe you throw a remark that could be personal, but still based on his statements, because calling someone unintelligent at times, yes, it can be a personal insult of very little value to debate. But depending, if you have a legitimate case based on what was said I'm not necessarily going to say it's the best thing to say, but it's not, technically speaking, disconnected or unwarranted or has nothing to do with the matter at hand. Because we're looking at a statement and we're seeing a very basic blunder. That said, technically speaking, even statements like that are not always the best way to do it if you're trying to be professional. But the caller from Marima is not a parliamentarian. He's not a member of cabinet. He's not a member of the opposition. He's not an elected official. He's not a politician. It's not his job to be professional when he's giving his opinion. I just want to make sure people understand this. Let's go in the next clip now with the Prime Minister, because what I just said kind of leads into this to some degree. Let's run the clip.
Whilst that was happening, many in the PNM hierarchy fattened their pockets from their local drug mafia financiers, while the people of this country, our country, suffered. I say, Honourable Speaker, a short distance away from this building, the new blood-red Balje House stands as a gravestone to drug money, pedophilia, and theft.
I don't think it's offensive and insulting directed to a member of the House. It's not directed to a member of the House.
Mr. Speaker, if you are saying that statement is not directed to a member of the House?
There is no member to whom it's directed. It's directed at an entity which all members are entitled to. The member for Port of Spain not just asked the member for Orapooch and put it like that. I'm not going to repeat it, but it's not directed at a member of the House.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. You know, Honourable Speaker, the member for Rima and I were in a law class together. So you know how to craft your statements as a good lawyer. I have not named anyone. If you want to take ownership of it, take it. But I have not named any of them.
I mean, she named the PNM, so technically speaking, the Speaker is correct. As far as I'm aware, the standing order that was invoked, it requires you to have a remark pointed at an individual. Now, we get into semantics because the spirit of the law, I think the opposition leader not necessarily is correct, but had a reasonable point to make if you are just from the outside looking in, looking at the situation and saying, so you're telling me that I can't insult one of them, but I can insult all of them. You're telling me that I can't accuse one of them, but I can accuse all of them collectively. And not just accuse all of them collectively, but ironically, do so in a way that is potentially blatantly mistrue because they're not the same members of the PNM that was in leadership from whatever time period that you are potentially referencing because you're referencing the past. Now, that in and of itself is semantics, but I didn't like this exchange one bit. I found that the Prime Minister was basically playing smart with stripping his hair, and more importantly, it goes to what I was saying earlier. They're debating the SOE, and she is implying, oh, they profited from the gangs, they profited from, look, they didn't care to solve the violence, and they profited from it. Now, you want to say that they did nothing. I ain't going to fault you for that. That part, results-based analysis, part of the public record, you could argue, is more or less true. If it's not a statement of fact, it is practically close as you could get to a statement of fact without being a fact, right? I don't think there's any mistruths there. The problem is now you're throwing in these things to disparage the opposition. To what end? What does that have to do with proving the point that the state of emergency, because that's what was debated. If my memory is, we're not debating the inability of the PNM administration of yesteryear to solve crime. That's not what's debated. The debate is the requirement of the state of emergency. And instead of debating the matter at hand, the Prime Minister in that moment is committing time, effort, and energy to debate the individuals on the other side. Now, at the end of the day, you could say, in your opinion, they're not fit for the jobs that they hold. But unfortunately, enough people voted for them to say that they are. You can't come and say you have some divine mandate from the people when only 54% of the voters voted to do whatever you think is best, no matter how extreme or unconventional, but then disregard the fact that they got around 60% of the number of votes that you did. Yes, it was a landslide, but it wasn't that much of a landslide, as one would think. When you take into context the fact that it was more about voters who didn't vote than voters who did vote. So they have a mandate, at the very least, because this is the House, by their constituencies. Unless, of course, you are the Prime Minister of government constituencies and not the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. So to try to discredit what they have to say, whether it is good or bad, let the people sort that out. Let third-party people like me sort that out. But if you want to debate what they say on the merits of the topic at hand, if the PNM says something about the SOE and how it's unnecessary and you debate that, that's what the debate is. You debate the issues, not the people. You don't have a right to debate the people. You debate the people in the campaign trail. You won that debate. That debate is over. As Arima said, why are you still campaigning for? Well, one of the explanations why is because they know they don't have a crime plan. Because they know everything they say about the PNM not being able to solve crime is more or less in their wheelhouse. What are the things that they suggested the government do while in opposition? Stand your ground laws, state of emergency. The list stops there. And granted, I get it, the PNM probably did this when they were in office. But just because somebody did it doesn't justify you doing it again. Now, on some level, when it doesn't matter, I'm not like with the American impeachment thing. That doesn't matter to me. I don't have any stake in that, one way or the other. But here, locally, it matters to me. Here, I am affected. Now, in some cases, when there isn't any sort of practical consequence, fine, have at it. It's you looking unprofessional, whichever side it is. But just because the PNM did it doesn't mean now that we can do it and it's fine. Especially when you campaigned on, look how bad the PNM are, look at what they did. But when we do it, somehow it's magically okay. No, the point is we're supposed to see better. And that applies to the PNM as well. Remember when the former Minister of Education wanted to make a remark about the Prime Minister? I pointed out she should not have responded in the same manner that the Prime Minister's statements were put out. We have Digger Martin on the line. Good morning, caller, you're on the air.
Good morning, Sean. 2 points.
Yes.
The first one, I want to talk about the Chairman's authority and the chairman and the board failing to resign immediately forthwith. Let's go back in the history of the Chairman's authority. It was conceptualized by Kamla Prasad government in 2012, and in 2015 they implemented. Subsequently to all of those, there had been several players' boards, and they all failed immensely with what was the objective of the Children's Authority. It's to protect children, to move this country forward, because our former Prime Minister said the future of the country is in the bags of the children. So they have a special niche with our development. Let's look at some of the heinous activities within the Children's Authority and why we should have gone already. You remember in 2021, 5 years ago, 5 boys escaped from the authority at one of the homes.
Mm-hmm.
2 died, ambush killed. Who has been held accountable for that? We haven't heard the police investigation and to close it out. The Children's Authority then said there was a breach in protocol. Did anyone been held or disciplined or dismissed for that? No. Move forward. The CEO was dismissed for some nefarious act with a young person. And that is where it is alleged some sort of pedophilic behavior. So I cannot understand why they probably want to stay when everything has pointed to a dysfunctional board, 2, 3 boards. The fact that they spent 320 on ice maker, what was that for? It makes no common sense. And then your fiduciary responsibility, you ended up in a black hole and you're silent. You're now coming to tell no man, they have to go, and I'm hoping that the president act forthwith. She cannot stay silent on this. The government said they don't want the board, and if they don't want the board must go. Now, the second thing is the clip they played with the Honorable Prime Minister identifying Balize House and what it is all about, alluding to the fact it might have been funded by nefarious activity. But that possibly is in the public domain. Somebody said they were selling a set of raffle. All Penny has to do, show us the revenue that could have gone to financing and constructing that. That is all. Because one of the things is that, and I'm coming back to the police has been dysfunctional for quite a while. They are politically aligned with political parties and they don't do the work. Look, for example, kidnapping and extortion. You remember a fellow by the name of Oswin Alad, an ACP, who it is alleged had a ransom for the Nat brothers? What happened? What did the police service commissioners done at that point in time? The chairman of the police service commission was a fellow by the name of Thomas. It so happened Thomas is in another issue with a kidnapping of Thomas in Barbados. So the police service has been dysfunctional and we haven't been able to get them to do what is required. I am saying now the police service current board has to go. They have not called on the commissioner of police and senior officers to basically tell us why the judges have pronounced on them with all sorts of nefarious activity, malicious prosecution. So, yes, the Prime Minister said certain things now. The proof is in the pudding. Let us see where it goes. There's a list out there now. There's a list. We are nowhere the blind spots are in Trinidad. We know those on the North Coast. What sort of activity happened on the North Coast? Caribbean, what sort of activities? We will see. Remember that North Coast was famous for a lot of activities. I'm not going to call names, but you have friends, you have fishermen, you had a fella called Sandman, all of those things are going to have a nice morning.
Thank you, caller. Well, caller, first of all, you started to make a somewhat slightly better case than the minister over this Children's Authority issue. One of the things that I have to ask is, why didn't she go into more details? When you are a leader, one of the things is you don't want to leave things in doubt. You don't want to assume people know. You don't want people to have room to question you. You want to be clear, concise, straightforward to the point, and as detailed as possible and as an efficient way as possible. She wasn't very efficient with her words. Explain why the ice maker is bad. Don't just tell me big number bad. The PNM did that. More importantly, consider the implications of what you are suggesting. It seems as though the government does not have an avenue to replace the board. If they could merely demand the board resign, without giving us a good case as to why the board is ineffectual. I know you're saying it's there. No, they have to say it. They have to say it. And in fact, I have something to show that will kind of be a tangential example. They have to say it when they're making these claims. Because if you could just say, look, public, how bad it is, they should resign, and force them in that manner to resign, at some point, that is going to undermine independent institutions. A situation like that will eventually make it easier if we have a similar situation where the PNM wants the DPP to go, to get rid of the DPP. When the PNM wanted the Auditor General to go, to get rid of the Auditor General. Now, you said it, I didn't look this up, so I'm going off of what you said, that the partnership implemented the terms of authority. Why is it then that they didn't put things in place to hold the members of the board accountable, or to be able to hold them accountable? She's asking them to resign, in part implies to me that they don't have as great of a case as you think they have. And with regards to the crime thing on Bally's house, and we know, and we know, and we know, we also knew Gary Griffith did X, Y, and Z. Just like how the government could claim they have a list. The Americans gave them a list. Hey, the Americans gave the PNM list too. Dr. Keith Rowley had information on Gary Griffith. And he said he was going to reveal it until he didn't. And I took issue with that because it wasn't that Dr. Keith Rowley, it's wrong because Dr. Keith Rowley is wrong. It's wrong because it was wrong. It was wrong because without telling us any detailed information and providing us with evidence, with regards to the public discussion, all Dr. Keith Rowley did was imply Guy Griffith did illegal things to justify what was done to him. Now the Prime Minister is implying illegal things without providing any actual evidence. That is, to some extent, unprofessional, irresponsible, and unethical. She says it in Parliament, she has parliamentary privilege, fine, whatever. It's not professional. It's just not. In part because you have to take into context what the matter at hand was. What was the business they were conducting? Because you could believe it all you want, but you did not speak to my main point, which was they were debating the continuation of the SOE. The PNM's track record on crime and participation in criminal activity has nothing to do, not one thing, with regards to whether or not the SOE should be extended or not. It doesn't. That's not the matter at hand. If you want to have that debate, you can have that debate. But the Prime Minister didn't have enough things to say to support her own SOE. That's my interpretation of it. So, as Karen would say, you're going down a rabbit hole that she wants you to go down, forgetting that the parliamentary business in the moment was not debating the PNM. And that's one of the reasons why it's unprofessional. But the other thing is, and I've said this before, and I've said this about the PNM, this whole implying people break the law. Oh, Brent Thomas, he's running away. Or the commissioner, she signed for sniper rifles. What law did she break? If it was wrong for them to do it, why is it right for the current government to do it? Yes, it seems as though she's done what she needed to do to not be sued for slander. I'll give her that. Now, the flip side is, Opposition Chief Whip Marvin Gonzalez, he's saying that drug money financed the UNC's political campaign in the election. Now, here's the thing. There is at least a not too insignificant group of the population who believes that drug money finances both parties. I mean, there are certain current ministers who were newly minted ministers in the partnership whose net worth allegedly jumped up significantly. And it just so happens that one of the few major controversies that are on the public record happened in the ministry of that minister. I mean, let's put it this way. If accusations are good enough, David Lee needed to be kicked out of Parliament, years ago, because there's an open case on him. Not just an accusation. There's no open case against the PNM. The UNC's government now, there's no open case on the PNM. There was an open case on Mr. Lee. But he's innocent until proven guilty, a point I made when it came up. Innocent until proven guilty. It's a very interesting debate on whether or not people with court cases, over-the-head criminal cases, should be allowed to be in Parliament. But the whole concept of innocent until proven guilty, to what degree do we want to suspend it or remove it? Why? Because if you start to do that, then all of a sudden your principles aren't principles, they're preferences. Because with regards to that, you said let the PNM provide their financial statements to disprove, basically, the accusations. But think about that for a second. Our criminal justice system is predicated on the concept of innocent until proven guilty. That means that prosecutors have to prove a crime is committed, not that the defense has to start from disproving the crime or the accusation. Yes, they find evidence to counter the prosecution's evidence. I get that. But the point is, if the defense has no evidence and the prosecution has no evidence, the defense is not compelled to have to bring something out that they had to disprove the claims made against their client in order to get a not guilty verdict. But the prosecution, they have to get evidence in order to get a conviction. What you're saying is anathema to our criminal justice system, and it's asking us to flip things around. It's saying now, if I accuse you of something, you have to disprove the accusation. And I don't have to do nothing as a prosecutor. I don't have to do anything as a criminal justice system. And that is a recipe for disaster. Because at some point, if that is the new standard, it will be leveled on the current government. It will. And then they'll be spending more time disproving accusations, if that's the new standard, than actually doing their job. And if and when the PNM are voted back in, it'll be the same. Members of society will have to spend way too much time, will have too much of a burden to defend themselves, because now they have to have an affirmative defense before the prosecutor has to even give up a shred of evidence to make the case. That's not how it works. That is not how it works. So we can't now make that demand because it suits us in the moment. Because if that's the case, it's no longer a principle, it's a preference, then things get real messy real fast, and then you get precedents that cannot be upheld. You cannot build a society on such a shaky foundation. Because, look, let's just go with the standards. They did it to Gary. And look at what happened to the position of Commissioner of Police after that. When you undermine the office of Commissioner of Police, look at what happened after that. Let's go with the next clip. We're running out of time. Let's go to the next clip quick.
Mr. Speaker, in response to this question, may I advise the member for Port of Spain North St. Anne's West that the answer to this question is already in the public domain, indeed on the Hansard record, on March 6, 2026.
For the viewing members of the population and the public who would like to know the answer, would the Minister of Energy please read the Hansard that he allegedly has?
Mr. Speaker, may I again advise the honourable member that the viewing public, so to speak, has had about 3 opportunities to view the contribution of last week, Friday, the 6th, 2026. It has been aired repeatedly on the Parliament channel and in the media. Thank you very much.
So, Mr. Speaker, is it that the Minister of Energy is refusing to tell the House how many leases and farm-outs Heritage has given to his friend T.N. Ramnath?
I think we can bring this fast developing. Hang on a second, Outreach. I think we can bring this what threatens to be a fast developing charade to an end, okay? Let's look at the standing order. The standing order says this is a question on notice. Member for Pooch, I'd be very grateful if you could pay some attention to this. I'd be very happy. The problem with adopting the position which you have adopted is you have to remember this is a question on notice. If ministers are free to answer the question on notice prior to the 21 days, what happens is it undermines the ability of the House to receive the answers. I'm merely going to ask you if you could simply, if you are inclined to simply repeat the answer which would be on the public record so that we can get on with it. It's a long day ahead, but you see, I think if you adopt that position, what happens is that it undermines the purport of the rule in 28 questions which notice is required, because if you look at it in any other way, a minister receiving a question on notice can simply avoid answering the questions by putting the questions out, the answer on the public record. That then undermines the purport of the standing order. So can I just ask you, so that we may save some time, if you may simply wish to repeat the answer which you gave on the answer. Thank you very much.
So, Leader of Government Business, Minister Padarath, he framed it as the Minister of Energy being ready for weeks to answer the questions. Now, we did say that the questions might be stale, right? But to my mind, the Minister of Energy then approaching the first question that was put forward, they claimed he was ready to answer the questions, and then the answer to the first question that he was asked to answer is, well, the answer is out there already. Why do I'm not going to repeat it. This is a formal proceeding. This is not just, you know, a strategy meeting. This is Parliament. And the Speaker basically had to tell him, well, no, that is not how it's supposed to be done if we are doing this properly. And the Speaker, now, it seems as though the Minister of Energy is not the only perpetrator of this. So kudos to the Speaker. Yes, I am not always happy with how he handles things, but kudos to the Speaker for standing up on the grounds of properly following the regulations of how parliamentary business is to be conducted. Because my assumption is one of the issues is, if you just say, well, the answer's out to the public, all of a sudden now, not only does it complicate things for the business of Parliament and the parliamentary record, but also I don't know if that would impact the follow-up questions, right? Because now what? You're telling the opposition you have to look up the answer. You have to go into the record to look up the answer for the question that technically is part of the parliamentary questions. And it's not as though there was any reason that it could not be a question in a parliamentary session. This is not a question on notice, right? And that just makes me think, once again, and this is an experienced politician, to what extent are our political class, or is the political class, our politicians, bad at their jobs? And it's not just the government side, by the way. Again, we had a Minister of Finance that acted as though he was ignorant of what an audit is and how it was to be conducted. And his corresponding Attorney General was acting in a manner that seemingly did not understand the role of the Attorney General and what his responsibilities were. And as far as I understand, he really was that, it was not an act, he really was that ignorant on his job. But, you know, that's what I've heard. I don't know to what extent that is true. But he acted in that manner. And these are not complex issues of law and the Constitution. It's an audit. It's an audit, stupid. So, while this is not necessarily a mistake to the same degree, to some extent, it is still leaving me with questions with regards to how ready and fit for the job is this generation of politicians. both sides of the aisle. I'll get to Stuart Young's statements in a bit. Let's run the next clip.
Mr. Speaker, at the risk of repeating what is already in the public domain, I have no difficulty with presenting an answer. The member has asked a question. Mr. Speaker, Heritage Petroleum Company Limited has granted one lease operatorship agreement to TN Ramnath and Company Limited. Originally, no friend of myself or anyone on this side, Mr. Speaker.
I intended to deal with that and ask the member for Port of Spain North to withdraw that part.
Originally granted in April, on April 1st, 1996. Originally granted, April 1st, 1996. Mr. Speaker, I just want to repeat what I said last week, since the member is encouraging me to do so. Mr. Speaker, it was on the 6th of May 2021 that the legal department at the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries presented to the former minister from Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West, recommendations for the issuance of lease operatorship agreements. I want to repeat, May 6, 2021, 6 entities were recommended. I will list the 6. Touchstone Exploration, Oil Belt Company Limited, Lease Operators Limited. Is that your friend or family? Lease Operators Limited, TN Ramnath and Company, Petroleum Contracting Services, and Muncie Oil Company Limited. 6 entities recommended. Mr. Speaker, what did the former minister do? On the 10th, 4 days later, the minister approved 5 out of the 6. Approved 5 out of the 6 4 days later, and stated, and I'm reading from the minute sheet of the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, which I have here. I have executed all sub-license but one. This particular sub-license is of concern to me, and I will conduct inquiries first. This is on the 10th of May 2021. Mr. Speaker, 21 finished. Now, in 4 days, he conducted inquiries on 5. But 1 had inquiries which he has stated he had signed properly. 2021 finished, 2022 finished, 2023 finished, 2024 finished, 2025 began, and the former minister was still conducting inquiries. That is the level of malice and vindictiveness and wickedity. Mr. Speaker, having entered office on the 3rd of May 2025, after 3 months, on the 14th of July 2025, I placed on the minute sheet, I have inquired, approved, Rudolph Munilal. Mr. Speaker, when I asked the legal department whether the minister made any inquiry, raised this matter, the answer was a categorical no. He signed, you had to sign in duplicate. He actually signed one and refused to sign the next one. This is the only sub-license where 2 ministers of energy have signed the same license. And I refused to sign the first one as a brand new print. I said if the minister from Port of Spain North St. Anne's West signed one, and that was good enough, then we signed the second one. That is the status of this matter. And the member should really apologize to the House and the country why he possessed such vindictiveness and malice.
I think you've sufficiently answered. Port of Spain North.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, is the member for Urupuch aware that he, along with TN Ramnath, are defendants in a corruption matter?
Not allowed. Not allowed.
I will get to Stuart Young's statements, both before and after. The exchange was what the Speaker was referencing to when he was responding to the situation with the Prime Minister, because the Prime Minister's contribution came after the fact. So this was an interesting time in Parliament. Now, with regards to the Minister of Energy, he is saying that TM Ramnath is basically being persecuted by the Minister of Energy because he got the request in 2021 and blanked it for like 4 to 5 years. The problem with that is, technically, what Stuart Young said there at the end, at least to some degree, is correct. He went on to say to Guardian Media via WhatsApp, so this is, again, I would say that the Minister of Energy, he gave his visionary events. It was limited to the parts that made his argument look good. And you could argue the same thing with Stuart Young. He might not be giving us everything. But he did say this: T.F. Ramnath is the subject of litigation by EMBD. That was when his mic cut off. That's the last thing that he said there. To litigation by EMBD, the Estate Management and Business Development, in a cartel claim for hundreds of millions of dollars, and Minister Munilal is a defendant in that litigation as well. So when you consider the timeline that the Minister of Energy presented, if you look up the case, and I believe there is documentation online for it, there is a matter between T.N. Ramnath and Company Limited and the Estate Management and Business Development Company Limited, as well as Taraduth Ramnath, Calco Limited, Mutilal, well, I won't go into it, but one of the people between EMBD and Rudal Munilal. The date, 6th of August 2020, which technically means that the vision events that the minister gave us is not quite as favorable as he would like to think, because the implications of the limited information, and I would prefer not to speculate further, but I'm going to go with what I got, is that Minister of Energy, then Minister of Energy Stuart Young, apparently found out that the year before there's a case. So now he rightfully says, I need to look into this further because there's a case. Now the case, I'm not entirely sure if it's criminal or if it's civil, right? It's kind of a form of corruption, but I'm not a lawyer, so I can't tell you, right? So I don't know if it's correct with what Mr. Young said when he said it was a corruption matter, right? In the sense of the implication is it's before the criminal court. I don't think it's before the criminal court or criminal court, right? So I don't like the Minister of Energy's argument to begin with. The holes are too easy to poke. If there's more to the story that he could give us, that's fine. However, and I'll close with this, I suspect that this was the intention of Mr. Young. They put the question in there. Now, to some degree, the question lost a lot of its teeth when the Minister of Energy said, well, they got one deal, they got one license, whatever. It wasn't a whole set, right? Now, we don't know the size of it. We don't know how much money is being passed, etc., etc. So there's a lot of incomplete information there. But the point is, it seemed as though Stuart Young was ready to ask this question so that he could then pounce to the information of the pending case of which the Minister of Energy is a party to. Now, on one hand, yes, that is relevant information with regards to, hey, the minister is trying to dispar, and maybe Minister Munilal was trying to kind of like head Stuart Young off at the pass. Because it's both of it is basically saying, no, the other side is corrupt, right? Now, on the surface of it, based on what I've seen, it is technically easier to side with Stuart Young. My problem is this. This seems more like a political theater show than wanting to be a responsible opposition looking to hold the government to account. Because in part, you could do all of this, but not then frame it in a way that is insulting, that is combative. One of the things that I started to think about when looking at all of these stories, right? Because again, do people know how to do their jobs once they get at this level? How to be professional? How to be proficient, right? Are they capable in responsible public communications? Are they capable with implementing policies responsibly, holistically, right? problem solving with critical thinking and not just lazy, whatever is easiest, or who gets to eat a food, or who gets the contract and then can pass things on the table. We all suspect this happens all the time, in part because of the ease of doing business. The poor ease of doing the business in this country is the gateway drug to corruption. And it's not just the government side, because dare I say, the former Minister of Energy, Stuart Young, he wanted to set up the Minister of Energy. But the situation, I don't think, was as effective as he expected. I think this was a poor choice of strategy on behalf of Mr. Young, and if it was approved by the PNM, in part because he himself went a little too over the top. He compounded the error. And part of the error is, listen, you need to rehabilitate yourself. Because at the end of the day, what we're seeing is not who could be better at governance. It is rather, look how bad the other side is. The problem is they end up racing to the bottom. They're more concerned about discrediting each other than being better than each other. And in my mind, one of the ways that you should, and maybe, you know what, the voters don't respond to this because emotionally it's not as appealing, it's not as exciting, it doesn't go viral on the headlines or in social media. But I would think on a basic level, do you know how to win the next election? It's very simple. Be better than the other guy or the other woman. Be better and let the contrast speak for itself. Why do you have to scream on a mountaintop, I'm better than them, I'm better than them? Yeah, well, too many people is not going to think that as a worthy entry to public discourse. It's just boasting. And more often than not, baseless accusations. But if you actually acted in a manner better than the other side, if you were more professional, if you acted with a sense of professionalism, of calm, grace, dignity, if you didn't stoop to personal attacks, if you weren't obsessed with individuals' bodily anatomy, if everything wasn't the other side's fault, both parties do it. But rather, if you had clear and concise arguments, sound reasoning and logic, a display of critical thinking, and if you limited your debates to the business at hand, if you debated the issues and not the people, because the vast majority of our debates are not about the issues. That's why both parties could be devoid of a crime plan, and yet both parties could try and debate national security. And somehow the supporters of both parties think their parties are not just right, but they're very right. Not just very right, but they have the perfect solution. Neither side has displayed any sort of capacity to even begin to get us a solution to crime. And the debates are empty and meaningless and shallow and are more directed at their opposition, their political opponents, than they are on the actual issues to actually talk it out. That's why the crime talks would have never worked. But they didn't disappoint. Neither side couldn't even get to the table. But if you show that, hey, I am willing to compromise, I am willing to listen, I am willing to consult, not just have a dog and pony show to sell my used car salesman pitch to my supporters, because they didn't go into PNM areas for the stand your ground legislation. Right? And I mean, to what degree does the PNM really did any consultation for the stuff they implemented, right? You can't show you're better than the other guy when both guys have significant deficiencies. What does that tell me? What does that tell me? It tells me that our voting population tolerates nonsense, and nonsense is far too weak of a word. It tells me that we have set the bar so low because they're supposedly not that. They supposedly are smart people, educated people, capable people. We have set the bar so low. This is what it amounts to. At some point, it's not the politicians' fault. It's not the government's fault. It's not the UNC's fault. It's not the PNM's fault. It's our fault. Some people want to say the PNM was in power all the time. Look how much bad things they did. Yes, that's nice. Maybe if more people were involved in the democratic process, that would have been allowed to happen. But more importantly, at some point, we have to learn from the mistakes. And the mistake was not voting the PNM in. The mistake was being complacent in the democratic process to tolerate nonsense that allowed for systemic erosion of our society over the course of decades. And it wasn't just all the PNM. Because, dare I say, any time, the PNM is corrupt, but the UNC is not corrupt. As Colin Ibbett says, the country views the PNM as less corrupt. And a lot of people are like, oh, what does that mean? Hey, the point is we view both of them as corrupt. If you want to think your side is some holier than thou magical fairyland of virtue, that's nice. I have yet to see it displayed in a practical measure. Now, I'll close with this. The revitalization plan. I want to say this. I still have hope in the revitalization plan. But right now, it's just concepts. Concept art and ideas to go along with the concept art. There's no real details in it. And based on what I've seen from the government, and I would have, if you flipped it and it was a PNM presentation, I wouldn't be any more confident. I might be a little bit more confident because they would potentially be building off of Patrick Manning's plan. But that's the thing. There are certain things that are so obvious. You know, it's not as though you could avoid it. Investing in the waterfront, improving the waterfront and the like, these things are kind of obvious. And on some level, you can't fault the government for looking to do something that Mr. Manning was also looking to do, to go further with developing Port of Spain's waterfront, Invaders Bay, etc., etc. You can't blame the UNC for doing that. What I can say is this. Trying to kind of pass it off as your original idea, that's a waste of time. Now, you're not doing exactly what Mr. Manning intended. You're not following his plan to the letter to the T. You're not limited by what he thought was best. You're putting your own spirit in it. That's fine. But on some level, case in point of professionalism, of governance, of stability, of continuity, if you acknowledge the fact that, hey, Patrick Manning wanted to do X, Y, and Z, we think those things are a good idea and necessary, and we will continue that, regardless of his political affiliation, regardless of the fact that we were political opponents, regardless of our other disagreements with him that led us to compete in general elections against him. By acknowledging the ideas of someone who came before from the other side, I mean, you took in John Jeremy. By acknowledging those ideas now, you give the country room to not be separated by political boundary lines, to not look at things in the lenses of either the red or the yellow. And then you set up a precedent to say, listen, if we have a good idea, what is politically acceptable is to continue the good idea, even if there is a change in government, because Minister Mohit, that is what stability means. And with that, I will end. There's more to say. There's more that could be said, but I don't have time to say it. Thanks to the callers that called in. I don't think we have any, let me just make sure, messages today. So, any comments today? So with that said, when I say remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other, it is not just to remember the fact that you're a citizen of this country when it's a general election, it's time to vote. Or when it's a local government election, it's time to vote. If the voter turnout of the local government election is lower than it was the last local government election, that to me is a bad sign for this country. That has nothing to do with the job performance of the UNC or the PNM. Because the job performance that matters just as much is voter participation and citizen participation in our democracy. Democracy is so far the most advanced form of citizenship that the human race has. It's not perfect, and hopefully we can improve upon it in the future because it's flawed. But until then, this is the best we got. This is how we choose to live. Why is it that we then decide to live in a democracy, but we want to wash our hands of everything? A system of government that's supposed to include the will of the people, and yet too much of the people are more than content to ignore what's going on. and to hope for the best. Remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other. It is both in your own best interest to participate in our governance as citizens, as it is to the benefit of the people around you. And if not for yourself, as I have said, rarely, but before, if not for yourself, for your children and your children's children and your children's children's children. Stay safe. Don't forget, it's nice to be nice. Maybe to remind people of the old-time days might get us back to some of the old-time ways. But until then, we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
WESN